Lieutenant Jessica Miller stood before the massive holographic display, her expression carefully neutral as Admiral Kovacs of the Galactic Defense Force gestured at the rotating image of what could generously be called a spacecraft. The Admiral's upper mandibles twitched in what she had learned was the equivalent of a smirk. "Your species' first assignment," the Admiral announced, his translators adding an unmistakable note of amusement to his words. "The ANV 356. She's served the fleet for over 2 centuries." Jessica studied the ship's hologram, taking in every detail of its weathered hull and outdated configuration. Around the briefing room, representatives from various allied species watched her reaction, some with poorly concealed disdain, others with what appeared to be pity. "Thank you, Admiral," she replied, her voice steady. "When can my team begin the inspection?" The Admiral's mandibles twitched again. "Inspection? Lieutenant, this isn't a new vessel requiring certification. The ANV 356 is. What's that human expression? Ah, yes. A hand-me-down. It's fully functional, if rather limited." A ripple of chitters and clicks, alien laughter, spread through the room. Jessica maintained her professional demeanor, but her mind was already racing. The hologram showed massive engine compartments designed for ancient power systems, unrestricted access to the quantum core, and modular sections that predated modern safety protocols. "Of course, Admiral, we're grateful for the opportunity to serve alongside the Coalition," she said, then added with careful precision, "I trust the maintenance logs and technical specifications will be made available to my engineering team." The Admiral waved a dismissive appendage. "Everything will be transferred to your systems, though I doubt you'll find much use for them. The ship's design is, well, let's say it's from a simpler time." Jessica downloaded the specs to her neural interface, her augmented vision already highlighting potential modification points. The older design meant fewer automated systems, less integration with the Coalition's network, and most importantly, more room for what her team would call creative solutions. "Lieutenant Miller," a soft voice cut through her thoughts. It belonged to Commander Xinra, one of the few alien officers who had consistently treated the human contingent with respect. "I feel I should mention. The ANV 356 has a certain reputation. The crew calls it the Limping Leviathan." "Every ship has a story, Commander," Jessica replied, allowing a small smile. "Perhaps it's time for this one to begin a new chapter." Later that night, in the cramped quarters assigned to the human engineering team, Jessica projected the ship's schematics across the wall. Her team, handpicked for their unconventional thinking and problem-solving skills, gathered around. "They think they're humbling us," she announced, highlighting the ship's supposedly obsolete systems. "But look at this. The quantum core has no modern restrictions. Those oversized engine compartments, perfect for our modular designs. And the hull. It's basic enough that we can modify it without triggering any Coalition safety protocols." Chief Engineer Marcus Rodriguez whistled low. "Those energy distribution systems are ancient, but if we rerouted them through some of our new superconductors, and those weapon mounts," Lieutenant Sarah Hayes added, her eyes lighting up, "they're so simple we could adapt them for almost anything. No AI restrictions, no automated limiters." "Exactly," Jessica said, her smile growing. "They gave us a ship so old it predates most of their regulations. They see junk. I see freedom to innovate." She stood, looking at each member of her team. They were the ones nobody else had wanted. The tinkerers, the rule benders, the ones who asked why not, instead of why. "Tomorrow, we start the refit. They think they're teaching us our place in the Coalition." She gestured at the schematics, where her neural interface was already highlighting dozens of possible modifications. "Instead, they've given us a canvas. Let's show them how humans paint." The team broke into grins. In the projected light of their new command, they began to plan, their voices growing animated, as they saw what Jessica had seen. Not a broken-down relic, but a ship free from the constraints of modern limitations. The ANV 356 might have been the weakest ship in the lineup, but that was about to change. The real question was, would the galaxy be ready for what humanity could do with a little room to innovate? Inspector Kazoth's fourth set of eyes bulged as he watched the humans tear into the ANV 356's primary power distribution node. His silvery scales rattled with barely contained distress as Lieutenant Miller's team worked with what he could only describe as orchestrated chaos. "This is highly irregular," he chittered, his translator struggling to convey the full depth of his agitation. "That system has functioned adequately for 2 centuries. Jessica didn't look up from the holographic diagnostic display she was manipulating. "Adequately isn't good enough, Inspector. Marcus, how's that new alloy integration coming along?" Chief Engineer Rodriguez emerged from a junction box, his face smeared with iridescent coolant. "The biomimetic circuits are taking to the old power lanes like they were made for each other. It's actually kind of beautiful, boss." Kazoth scuttled closer, all 6 of his eyes now focused on the gleaming, almost liquid-looking metal that the humans were threading through the ship's ancient power system. "That material isn't in any coalition database. It's unauthorized. Untested." "Oh, it's tested," Sarah Hayes called from her position near the quantum core. She was surrounded by holographic screens showing complex simulations. "We've been developing this stuff for years. It's based on how human nerve cells transmit energy, just scaled up and modified for spacecraft use." The inspector's scales shifted to a pale green of alarm. "You're using biological principles in a warship's power grid. This is brilliant," Jessica suggested, finally looking up with a grin. "The alloy learns and adapts to power fluctuations, just like a human nervous system adapts to new movement patterns." Before Kazoth could voice another objection, a low hum filled the chamber. The new power conduits pulsed with a soft, blue-white light, creating patterns that reminded him uncomfortably of a living thing's circulatory system. "But that's not even the best part," Jessica continued, her eyes shining with the same energy that now flowed through the ship's veins. "Show him the shield modification, Sarah." Hayes initiated a simulation on the main display. It showed the ANV 356's standard shield configuration, then overlaid it with something that made Kazoth's technical training scream in protest. "You've inverted the shield harmonics," he asked, his voice rising an octave. "That's completely counter to all known defense principles." "Exactly," Jessica said. "Sarah, care to demonstrate?" Hayes activated a small force field generator. A tiny shield bubble appeared between them and the power core. "Traditional shields try to deflect or absorb energy, right? But we thought, what if we could do something different?" She tapped a command, and a low-power test beam struck the shield. Instead of the expected deflection, the shield seemed to flow around the impact point, thickening and strengthening. "We call it dynamic adaptation," Jessica explained, watching Kazoth's reaction carefully. "The more force applied, the stronger the shield becomes at that point, like a muscle responding to stress." The inspector stared at the display, his scientific mind warring with years of orthodox training. But the power requirements are actually lower than standard shields," Rodriguez interjected, "thanks to our new distribution system. The biomimetic alloy channels energy where it's needed, when it's needed, with almost no waste." Kazoth's scales had shifted to the deep blue of deep thought. "This is unprecedented. I should report these modifications immediately." "You could," Jessica agreed, "but then you'd miss what we're planning for the weapon systems. Unless, of course, you'd rather not be the first inspector to document a completely new approach to starship design." She could almost see the gears turning in the alien's mind. Scientific curiosity battling with bureaucratic duty. Finally, his scales settled into a curious purple shade. Perhaps I could delay my report for a more comprehensive analysis. Jessica's grin widened. I thought you might say that. Want to see how we're planning to integrate gaming neural networks into the targeting systems? Zoth's eyes all blinked in sequence, the equivalent of a resigned sigh. I suspect I'm going to regret this. But proceed, Lieutenant Miller. As she led the inspector toward the weapons control center, Jessica caught Rodriguez's eye and winked. They'd just won their first convert to the human way of thinking. The question was, how many more would follow once they saw what the ANV-356 could really do? The distress call echoed through the ANV-356's bridge at 300 ship time. A refugee transport, carrying civilians from the outer colonies, had dropped out of FTL directly into a pirate ambush. Lieutenant Miller's hands flew across the holographic controls before the message even finished playing. All stations, combat positions, she ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surge. Marcus, how's our new power grid holding? Rodriguez's voice came through crystal clear on the modified comm system. Purring like a kitten. Boss, all those midnight adjustments are paying off. The main display lit up with multiple contacts. 3 heavily armed pirate vessels surrounding the civilian transport. Their leader's transmission cut through the standard emergency channels. Well, the coalition sends us a museum piece. The pirate captain's translated voice dripped with contempt. Stand down, humans. This rust bucket won't last 10 seconds against modern ships. Jessica allowed herself a small smile. Sarah, are they scanning us? Trying to, Hayes replied from the tactical station. Their sensors are bouncing off our modified hull like we planned. All they're seeing is what we want them to see. An outdated light cruiser running on fumes. The pirate leader's laughter filled the command channel. Your power signature is barely registering. Leave now, and we might let you limp home to tell tales of our mercy. Speaking of power signatures, Jessica said quietly, Marcus, initiate Protocol Thunderstrike. Deep within the ship's modified core, the biomimetic power grid began to pulse. Energy that had been deliberately hidden now surged through the advanced conduits, building to levels that would have been impossible with the original systems. Ma'am, one of the pirate captain's crew could be heard warning. Something's wrong with our readings. Jessica's fingers danced across her controls. Sarah, pattern delta. Show them what a museum piece can do. The ANV-356 response was beautiful in its complexity. Weapon ports that hadn't existed moments before appeared as sections of the hull shifted and reconfigured. The neural network-guided targeting systems, trained on centuries of human combat data, calculated firing solutions that the pirates' computers insisted were impossible. By the void, the pirate leader gasped as his sensors finally showed the truth. What kind of ship is this? The kind that humanity built, Jessica answered, then triggered the attack. The ANV-356 moved like no ship its size should. The modified engines pushing it through maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. Energy weapons fire lanced out in precisely calculated patterns, each shot predicted and guided by gaming algorithms that had mastered the art of three-dimensional combat. The first pirate vessel's shields buckled under the assault, their standard defense programs unable to adapt to the constantly changing attack patterns. The second ship tried to return fire, only to find their shots absorbed and redirected by the ANV-356's dynamic shield system. Impossible, the pirate leader snarled. No light cruiser has this kind of power. You're right, Jessica agreed, as her ship executed a maneuver that looked more like a fighter's combat roll than a cruiser's movement. A standard light cruiser doesn't. But then again, we're not very good at following standards. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, 2 pirate ships had surrendered, their weapons disabled by precisely targeted shots. The third, the leader's vessel, had tried to run, only to find its engines mysteriously offline after a burst of energy that the ANV 356 logs would simply list as technical innovation in progress. As coalition security forces arrived to secure the scene, Inspector Kazoth emerged from his observer station, his scales shifting through colors so rapidly it almost made Jessica dizzy. That was. He paused, all 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "Lieutenant Miller, I believe I owe you an apology. I had thought your modifications were dangerous and unorthodox. I now see they are merely revolutionary." Jessica nodded to her crew, each of whom wore the satisfied expression of engineers whose creations have performed exactly as designed. "Revolution is what humans do best, Inspector, and we're just getting started." On the main display, the rescued refugee ship was already transmitting its thanks, but more importantly, encrypted coalition channels were buzzing with news of the battle. The story of how an obsolete light cruiser had outmaneuvered and outfought 3 modern pirate vessels would spread quickly. The age of the limping Leviathan was over. The legend of humanity's first coalition warship was just beginning. The coalition High Command inspection team arrived with all the warmth of a solar winter. 5 senior officers, representing the most powerful species in the Alliance, strode through the ANV 356 corridors, with data scanners humming and disapproval radiating from their various appendages. Lieutenant Miller, the lead inspector, a towering crystalline being named Exal, chimed in harmonics that suggested barely contained irritation. "Your recent performance has raised significant questions. We require a full demonstration of all modifications." Jessica exchanged a quick glance with Rodriguez, who was trying not to smile. "Of course, Inspector. Where would you like to begin?" "The weapon systems," demanded a Serpentine admiral named Sith. "Our analysis shows energy outputs that should be impossible for a vessel of this class." "Ah, yes." Jessica led them to what appeared to be a standard maintenance tube. "Marcus, would you do the honors?" Rodriguez pressed his hand against a hidden panel. The entire section of hull transformed, plates shifting and reconfiguring until what had been a simple accessway became a sophisticated launch bay. By the first stars, Kekshal vibrated in shock. "What are those?" Dozens of small, sleek drones hung in their cradles, each one humming with potential energy. "We call them the Swarm," Jessica explained. "Converted maintenance bots modified with gaming AI and linked to our neural networks." "Gaming AI?" The avian inspector squawked. "You're using entertainment software in combat systems. Humans have been simulating space combat in games for centuries," Sarah Hayes called from her station. "Our neural networks have access to millions of combat scenarios, each one teaching them new strategies." The inspection team's unified expression of horror almost made Jessica laugh. Instead, she continued the tour. "And that's just the beginning. Would you like to see how we're recycling engine heat into weapon power?" The next hour was a symphony of alien disbelief. Jessica's team revealed system after system that challenged everything the Coalition considered proper engineering. The self-repairing hull plates based on human blood clotting. The adaptive shield harmonics inspired by Earth's magnetic field. Each revelation left the inspectors more bewildered than the last. "This is completely irregular," Admiral Sith finally exploded after witnessing the quantum probability engine that Rodriguez had dubbed the coffee maker. "Half of these modifications violate basic safety protocols." "Actually," Inspector Kazoth interrupted, his scales gleaming with academic interest, "they don't. I've reviewed the regulations extensively. Since the ANV 356 predates most modern safety protocols, it's technically exempt from them. and the humans have actually improved overall safety while thinking outside the designated cubic structure. You support this madness? Hexhall chimed in disbelief. I support results, Kazoth replied. Their first combat engagement resulted in 0 casualties, minimal damage, and the successful protection of civilian lives, using methods that, while unorthodox, are probably effective. Jessica stepped forward. Members of the inspection team, everything we've done here has a single purpose: to take what others considered obsolete and make it not just functional, but exceptional. We don't break rules. We find new ways to achieve their goals. She gestured to the ship around them. The ANV 356 isn't just a warship anymore. It's a proof of concept, a demonstration that sometimes the best way forward isn't the expected path. The inspectors huddled together, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, chimes, and whistles. Finally, Exhol turned back to Jessica. Your modifications will be provisionally approved, the crystalline being announced. But we have one final question. What is that installation near the quantum core that you haven't shown us? Jessica's team all developed sudden interest in their datapads. That's just a little project we're working on. Still in development, really. Nothing to worry about. Lieutenant Miller, Exhal's tone carried a warning. Tell you what, Jessica offered with her most diplomatic smile. When we perfect it, you'll be the first to know. Assuming, of course, that the enemy doesn't find out first. As the inspection team left, looking both impressed and deeply unsettled, Rodriguez sidled up to his commander. You think they bought it? They're too busy processing everything else to worry about one more mystery, Jessica replied. Now let's get back to work. That new system won't build itself. And deep in the ship's heart, behind layers of modified hull plating and quantum shielding, something new continued to take shape, something that would make their previous innovations look like warm-up exercises. The emergency alert tore through every communication channel in the Coalition fleet. Jessica was already running to the bridge when the first images came through. The Swarm Collective, a devastating hive-mind force, had evolved beyond their known parameters. 3 Coalition battle groups had already fallen. Status report, she called out as she entered the command center. Sarah Hayes' fingers danced across her tactical display. The swarm has developed some kind of adaptive defense matrix. Standard Coalition weapons can't penetrate it. They're learning from each attack. On the main screen, a massive fleet of crystalline ships moved with terrifying synchronization. Each vessel seemed to pulse with an inner light that shifted and changed, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. Coalition Command is ordering all ships to fall back, Rodriguez reported from his station. They're saying the swarm has achieved technical superiority. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Technical superiority. Marcus, is the coffee maker ready? A slow grin spread across the chief engineer's face. As ready as it'll ever be, boss. Though the Coalition might have a few things to say about us using it. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, Jessica replied, then opened a channel to Fleet Command. This is Lieutenant Miller of the ANV 356. We're moving to engage the swarm. Admiral Exhal's crystalline form appeared on the communication screen. Lieutenant, that would be suicide. The swarm has adapted to our most advanced weapon systems. Your modified vessel cannot hope to. With all due respect, Admiral, Jessica interrupted. That's exactly why we might succeed. Hayes, show them what we've been working on. Sarah activated their latest innovation, deep within the ship's core. The system they'd hidden from the inspection team hummed to life. The coffee maker, actually a quantum probability engine, began its work. By the void, Inspector Kazoth, who had remained aboard as their Coalition observer, whispered, "What is that?" The ANV-356's weapons started to shift and change, energy signatures morphing through patterns that shouldn't have been possible. The ship's hull rippled with modifications that happened in real time, each configuration lasting only seconds before transforming into something new. "We call it the Chaos Engine," Jessica explained as her ship moved toward the swarm. "It doesn't just adapt, it predicts and counters adaptations before they happen. Every second, it generates thousands of possible weapon configurations and chooses the one most likely to succeed." That's impossible," Exhall chimed. "The processing power alone would be beyond any normal computer," Rodriguez finished. "That's why we based it on human neural patterns. Our brains make millions of random connections every second. We just scaled it up a bit." The first swarm ships noticed their approach. Their crystalline forms began to shift, preparing to counter whatever weapons the small human vessel might deploy. But the ANV-356 was already changing, its systems reconfiguring in ways that made the Coalition observers' sensors smoke with confusion. "Engaging now," Jessica announced. "Let's show them why unpredictability is humanity's greatest weapon." The battle that followed defied description. The ANV-356 fought like a creature from human mythology, each attack different from the last. When the swarm adapted to energy weapons, they found themselves facing kinetic rounds. When they shifted to counter physical attacks, the ship switched to gravimetric pulses. "It's working," Hayes called out, her voice filled with wonder. "They can't adapt fast enough to our random patterns." The swarm ships, for the first time in known history, showed signs of confusion. Their perfect synchronization began to falter as they encountered something their collective intelligence couldn't predict: organized chaos. "Coalition Command," Jessica transmitted, her voice steady despite the strain of combat. "We found their weakness. The swarm's strength is their ability to adapt to patterns. So we gave them no pattern to adapt to." She watched as more coalition ships began to move forward, their commanders finally understanding. The key isn't to hit them harder, it's to hit them differently, every time. And as the battle turned, as the mighty swarm found itself unable to counter an enemy that changed faster than it could learn, Jessica allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes, the best way to fight evolution wasn't to be stronger or faster. It was to be impossibly, wonderfully human. The battle had evolved into a dance of impossibilities. The ANV-356 moved through space like a boxer in the ring, never still, never predictable. The swarm's attempts to corner the modified cruiser grew more desperate with each failed adaptation. "They're learning," Hayes reported from her tactical station. "The hive mind is starting to recognize our basic movement patterns." Jessica nodded, her eyes fixed on the swirling combat display. "Then let's show them something new. Marcus, initiate Protocol Quicksilver." Rodriguez's fingers flew across his controls. "You sure about this, boss? We haven't tested it under combat conditions." "No time like the present," Jessica replied. "Sarah, release the modified drones." The ship's hull rippled as launch tubes that hadn't existed moments before appeared. Hundreds of small, agile drones poured out, each one operating on a different frequency, each one armed with a miniaturized version of their quantum probability engine. "By the void," Kazoth whispered from his observer station. "Those aren't just drones. They're micro-versions of your ship." "Swarm vessels adjusting formation," Hayes called out. "They're trying to calculate attack patterns." Jessica allowed herself a grim smile. "Good luck with that. Execute Scattered Symphony." The drones broke formation, each one becoming its own unpredictable fighter. Where the swarm expected organization, they found chaos. Where they anticipated patterns, they encountered random brilliance. Each drone operated independently yet somehow in perfect concert with its fellows, like a jazz band where every player was improvising, yet creating harmonious music. Multiple hits confirmed, Hayes reported, excitement creeping into her voice. Their adaptive shields can't keep up with the variable attack patterns. But the swarm wasn't finished. Their crystalline ships began to merge, forming larger and more complex structures. Energy readings spiked off the charts as they prepared what looked like a final devastating counterattack. All power to the quantum core, Jessica ordered. Marcus, is the coffee maker ready for Phase 2? Ready as it'll ever be, Rodriguez responded, though I should mention this might void whatever warranty we had left. The swarm's combined form released a burst of energy that could have vaporized a standard coalition battleship. It raced toward the ANV 356 like a solar flare, beautiful and deadly. Now, Jessica commanded. The ship's response defied physics itself. The quantum probability engine didn't just generate new weapon configurations, it transformed the entire vessel. For a fraction of a second, the ANV 356 existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously, the attack passing harmlessly through space that both was and wasn't occupied. Impossible. The Coalition Admiral's voice crackled through the comm. No ship can survive that kind of. Their words trailed off as the ANV 356 reappeared, its hull glowing with absorbed energy. The coffee maker had done more than save them. It had given them ammunition. Return to sender, Jessica said quietly. All batteries, fire. The energy the ship had absorbed was released back at the swarm, but not as a single attack. Instead, it fragmented into thousands of smaller bursts, each one operating on a different frequency, each one targeting a different part of the swarm's combined form. The effect was like watching a crystal shatter in slow motion, beautiful and devastating. Direct hits across all sections, Hayes reported. The swarm's combined form is breaking apart. They're retreating. The Coalition command channel erupted with cheers and various alien expressions of victory. But Jessica's attention was on her ship's systems, where warning lights were beginning to flash. Marcus, status report. The coffee maker's running hot, he replied, his hands moving rapidly over his controls. That quantum state trick pushed it past the red line. We need to power down, or... Before he could finish, the ship shuddered. Alarms blared as the quantum core's energy level spiked dangerously. All hands, brace for emergency procedures, Jessica called out. Then more quietly to her bridge crew. Well, team, looks like we get to test whether our safety protocols work, as well as our weapons. As the ANV 356 began its most dangerous battle yet, this time against its own overloaded systems, Jessica couldn't help but think that even this was somehow perfectly human. After all, what was more human than pushing the boundaries just a little too far, then finding a way to deal with the consequences? The emergency landing on Coalition Station 7 Beta would be talked about for years to come. The ANV 356 limped into port with its quantum core pulsing like a fevered heart, hull plates shifting between states of matter, and the infamous coffee maker producing enough heat to warm a small moon. Engineering report, Jessica called out as her team worked frantically to stabilize their systems. The good news is we're not going to explode, Rodriguez replied, his voice muffled from inside an access panel. The bad news is our ship can't decide if it wants to be solid, liquid, or a quantum probability cloud. Coalition emergency teams surrounded the dock, their various sensor equipment going haywire as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Inspector Kazoth had to physically restrain several technical officers from approaching too close. The energy readings are off any known scale, one of the station's engineers reported. It's like the ship is evolving. Not evolving, Jessica corrected, emerging from the main airlock with her uniform singed and a determined look in her eyes. "It's adapting, just like we designed it to do." Admiral Exhal's crystalline form shimmered with mixed frequencies of concern and amazement. "Lieutenant Miller, your actions today have complicated our understanding of what's possible." "That's what humans do best," Sarah Hayes added, joining her commander. She was carrying a data core that glowed with an inner light. "We take impossible as a personal challenge." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Coalition scientists swarmed over the ship, their initial horror at its modifications giving way to fascination. The ANV-356's systems, once dismissed as primitive and outdated, were now the center of intense study. The integration of gaming neural networks with military hardware. One xenotechnologist marveled. "It's so obviously brilliant that no one ever thought to try it." "And this biomimetic power grid," another added. "It's not just conducting energy. It's learning from the process." Jessica stood with her core team, watching as their innovations were finally recognized for what they were. Not violations of protocol, but evolution of technology itself. "High Command is requesting design specifications," Kazoth announced, his scales shifting to a proud purple. "They want to begin implementing similar modifications across the fleet." "They can try," Rodriguez muttered with a knowing smile. "But they'll find our systems don't work well with copy-paste engineering. Each innovation needs to be custom." The Admiral's next announcement silenced the busy dock. In light of recent events, the Coalition Defense Council has made an unprecedented decision. "Lieutenant Miller, your team is being promoted to lead a new division, Unconventional Warfare and Innovation." Jessica blinked. "Sir, we need more ships like the ANV-356, Hexal continued. "Not copies, but vessels that embrace the human approach to problem solving. You'll have full authority to modify and upgrade as you see fit." "And the safety protocols?" Hayes asked, unable to hide her grin. "Will be rewritten," Kazoth interjected, with a new understanding that safety doesn't always mean following the expected path. As the announcement spread through Coalition channels, Jessica's team received another surprise. Engineers from various species began requesting transfers to their division. The very races that had once mocked their primitive ship now wanted to learn their methods. "It's not just about the technology," Jessica explained to a group of eager apprentices later that day. "It's about seeing possibilities where others see problems, about understanding that sometimes the best solution isn't the most advanced one. It's the most creative one." She gestured to the ANV-356, still occasionally flickering between states as its systems stabilized. "This ship was given to us because no one else wanted it, because it was old, outdated, limited. But that's the thing about humans. We don't accept limitations. We see them as features waiting to be exploited." The station's observation deck filled with representatives from every coalition race, all watching as the former limping Leviathan began its recovery. None could miss the irony. The ship that was meant to teach humans their place in the galaxy had instead taught the galaxy something about humans. Innovation, they learned, wasn't about having the best tools. It was about having the vision to see what tools could become. 6 months later, the ANV-356's main hangar bay had been transformed into what Jessica liked to call the Innovation Academy. Engineers from every coalition species crowded around various workstations, each studying different aspects of human-style modification and adaptation. "Today's lesson is about perspective," Jessica announced to the latest class of eager students. The holographic display behind her showed the original specifications of the ANV-356. "Can anyone tell me what they see?" A crystalline engineer chimed forward. "An outdated power core with insufficient shielding. A weapons system 3 generations behind current standards," added a serpentine technical officer. Jessica smiled, and nodded to Sarah Hayes, who stood ready at the controls. "Watch this." The hologram shifted, showing how their team had modified each outdated system. The power core's lack of modern safeguards had allowed for the installation of their biomimetic grid. The primitive weapons platform had provided the perfect foundation for their neural network-guided targeting system. The first rule of human engineering, Rodriguez explained from his station, where he was helping a group of aliens understand the principles behind the coffee maker, is that every limitation is just an opportunity in disguise. Inspector Kizoth, now a permanent liaison to the Human Innovation Division, watched with pride as his former colleagues struggled with and then embraced these revolutionary concepts. "Commander Miller," he called out, using Jessica's new rank, "perhaps you should show them the graduation test." Jessica's eyes lit up. "Bring in the project." A small team of engineers wheeled in what appeared to be ancient navigation computer, its casing dented and its display cracked. The students stared at it with mixed expressions of confusion and dismay. "Your final assignment," Jessica announced, "is to make this navigation computer do something it was never designed to do. You have full access to our resources and 3 days to complete the project." "But what should we make it do?" asked one of the students. "That's part of the test," Hayes replied with a grin. "You have to figure that out too." As the students broke into teams and began examining the old computer, Jessica walked to the observation window. The ANV 356, now proudly bearing both Coalition and Human achievement marks, floated in its dock. Its hull still occasionally shifted with quantum uncertainties, a reminder of their greatest battle. "You know," Rodriguez said, joining her at the window, "I never expected our crazy modifications would end up being teaching material." "That's because you were too busy wondering if we could to wonder if we should," Hayes added, making all three of them laugh. A commotion from the training area drew their attention. One of the student teams had already begun taking apart the navigation computer, while another was running simulations on its base programming. "They're learning," Kizoth observed, his scales shifting to a pleased blue. "Not just the technical skills, but the mindset, the willingness to question everything." Jessica nodded. "That's the real legacy of the ANV 356, not the technology we created, but the way of thinking we're passing on." The ship's systems hummed in agreement, its modified core pulsing with a rhythm that had become famous throughout the Coalition. The limping Leviathan had become a symbol of something greater than just military power. It represented the moment when the galaxy learned that true innovation comes not from having the best tools, but from having the courage to use tools in ways no one had imagined. "Next week's class should be interesting," Hayes said, checking her schedule. "We're teaching them how to repurpose food synthesizers as emergency shield generators." "Are you ever going to tell them about the real coffee maker?" Rodriguez asked with a smirk. Jessica laughed. "Some secrets have to be earned. Let them figure out their own impossible solutions first." As she watched her students work, Jessica remembered the day they'd first seen the ANV 356. What the Coalition had intended as a lesson in humility had become a testament to human ingenuity. Every system they'd modified, every rule they'd creatively reinterpreted, had led to this moment. The ship that was meant to be their limitation had become the galaxy's greatest classroom, teaching a lesson that would echo through the stars. Never judge a species by their starting point. Judge them by what they can imagine, create, and achieve. After all, wasn't that the most human lesson of all?